So thanks everyone for having me here. I'm here to talk about a game that I've been working on for the past 6 months, just released two, and specifically I've been trying to dive deep into the design of 3D or third-person character combat and what makes it feel really good. So I've been going around to different games like Kingdom Hearts, Hi-Fi Rush, stuff like that, to get a better understanding of how to best make these games to feel good. And I'll be saying feel a lot in this talk because that's kind of what I was after in this whole pursuit. So quick table of contents, I'll go over quick introduction, how animations hold key into that, AI behavior, and different parts of melee combat. So my name is Christian Gabbianelli. I am a software developer over at MIT. We specifically work in the LEAP group to work on manufacturing simulations and game-based education around manufacturing, as well as XR simulations to go over stuff like intelligent tutoring systems inside virtual environments too, for better efficacy inside of education. But by passion and in my off time, I like to work on third-person character control games. That's kind of my niche that I love to do outside of work. So that's why I've been dumping all my focus on into understanding these designs and how these designs work. So this, real quick, is the game Crazy Arena Chaos that I worked on in my off time for the past 6 months with a bunch of different contributors inside our off time too to get to this end product. And let's see, the audio. Let's see. I guess there's no audio here.
There's the bottom left speaker. I guess it's not muted. It may not be going through too much.
Got it. That's fine. But the feedback that we've been getting from playtesters is while the combat is basic, the combat feels really good, and just knocking people around and making those hits feel impactful ended up being really good in this scenario. So taking from the design iteration that happened over the 6 months and then also starting to look at the different games as well, I started to understand a bit more of the design decisions that went into those third-person character combat to make them feel even better. Should be good. So in this process, just like everyone's starting up their development journey or down a different type of genre, there were a lot of ups that ended up happening. So there were great moments where everything felt great, things were going really well, but there were also a lot of downs where things just were not working, things weren't feeling right, and this is just a normal part of the process. That this is just a small sample of all the things that did go wrong during the development. And I learned a lot throughout the prototyping, where you can see this is like very early prototyping, but something was feeling so off, which is why I really had to dive deep into these systems and understand the design that went into them as well. And ended up with a really great feeling product where all our playtesters were super happy with it. And even so, there's still a lot I had to learn and had to figure out as well after even going to this released published game that people were enjoying, but I felt like there was still a lot left on the table. So I'm going to go into a bit of a retrospective about that, or a little bit of postmortem. So some of the games that I was taking away from as inspiration was like Hi-Fi Rush being the newest entry that I've been really enjoying, because just the combat's so solid in it. Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, even though it's 20 years old at this point, maybe a little older, still my friends and I and people still go back to as such a great example of great third-person character combat. So I've been using that to understand a bit more design decisions as well. And then I was also going for a bit of a Ratchet and Clank feel with the arena. So the first thing I learned through the design and through that process, and probably no one remembers this, but that GIF on the left I actually posted in the Boston Indie Slack channel maybe like 3 or 4 years ago to help get feedback, because I felt like it was good, but it wasn't great. And a lot of the community helped me realize that your animation timing is crucial. Having the right amount of anticipation, having the right amount of follow through was key to having a fast-paced action game. So my first attempt was super slow. It wasn't working. People were feeling like it was just too janky and not usable. Where on the right side, I tried to use some of those quicker keying and timing to get a much more usable product that people were having much more fun with. And this really came up down to the wind up in the animation itself. So the previous animation had like kind of a long wind up just to get into the action, which is why the players were having such a hard time just feeling invested into the game, or like they're making an impact because they're waiting so long when they hit the button. So going into here, I actually only have about 3 frames of anticipation before it puts the character into the action itself. So those design decisions were super crucial to having the player just immediately have feedback that what they're doing is actually happening. And the attack itself can be pretty long or pretty short, but then the follow through that you have after that can wildly make your attack feel heavier or not as impactful as well. So even in this case with my first attack, there's much longer time just to go through the follow through to get to the end of the attack because it needed to have a bit more weight and a bit more feel to it. And I went to Kingdom Hearts specifically, when you go and look at the basic 3-hit combo, you can see at the very end, that last hit has so much follow through that you can see that that should have just way more weight to that attack than all the rest of those intro ones. And even just quick, the example 2, the heavier the sword, you start to see that those attacks have so much longer of a follow through than just getting to the normal attack part of the animation. Now, with the enemies specifically, went through a few iterations of this to get a better understanding of how to make the enemies feel less brainless. So in the first iteration in the prototype, they were kind of running after you. As soon as they got to you and got in range, they attacked. People didn't find that fun. They felt like they were just running away from the enemies. It didn't feel like there was a clear timing that they could actually start to attack and hit. So I started looking at, it's called free flow combat, which is used in like the Arkham games or the Spider-Man games, the recent ones, where you have kind of more of a direction of your characters or your enemies taking positions around you and trying to get a better position awareness around you as well. And this came down to the game AI controllers being super crucial. I want to preface that it's game AI, not the AI that's used all over the place today, because this is just basic state machine logic where you have your different variations based on the inputs, so the enemies know what they should be doing at different times, and they can kind of randomize what they're doing, so it doesn't just feel like a chase and attack, chase and attack, chase and attack, which tends to get pretty boring. And some of the things you can do in Unreal Engine, because I did this project to learn Unreal Engine in C++, is that the Unreal Engine has some pretty great stimuli out of the box that you can use as AI perception. One of the key ones that I ended up using as like a first just trying to get into this was the sight perception, because out of the box you can figure out, okay, how far is the enemy, is the player in our cone of vision? If not, how long are we taking before we kind of lose that player and we start tracking off and doing our own stuff again? Then started understanding a bit more of the environmental query system in Unreal Engine, which the environmental query system will, like it says, query the environment around you. It'll figure out what's the best next possible place to go after it does whatever kind of action it's trying to do. So the green in this case is like the best possible target. It will go to those places because those are the highest weighted. Red's a bit more out of range. It's still viable, but it will tend to pick those places less. Blue's just completely outside doesn't use those. So that ended up being really good in making the enemies try to figure out different positions around the player as well. So it feels like they're trying to take a strategic, dynamic positioning around the player. Then started learning about AI directors. Now, the AI director will take all your enemies into account and kind of tell each character or each enemy, okay, it's your turn to attack. Okay, now it's your turn to attack. So the player is not feeling as overwhelmed because all of the enemies at once are just collapsing on you. It feels like they're actually taking turns. Someone said it felt like a kung fu movie, which was pretty funny because they were all taking turns and they weren't actually all trying to beat you to death at once, which ended up feeling pretty good in this case. And that's where the enemies felt a lot more engaging instead of just, like I said, just robotic. They just go after you and don't really do much else. But then, looking back at Kingdom Hearts, this isn't actually what happens. They don't use any kind of AI director to control whose turn it is to attack. They all do kind of just chase you down and figure out, okay, now I'm in range, now I'm going to attack. They do have a bit more of an animation offset to offset each other once the attack has happened, so they have a bit more nuance in what they're doing at all times. And the way that this doesn't feel bad in that game is because you have more party members that can take the aggro off of you. So you can see in the background you have Goofy getting hit by all four of those monkeys while that main leg enemy is going after you immediately, so you're not as overwhelmed by everything all at once. Which brings me to the actual attacks portion of making those attacks feel good and feel impactful. The first thing that I learned about was using a hit stop. And in this case, once you actually make contact with the enemy or with the player, you can really give good feedback to your player by slowing down the animation of both the enemy and the player, which gives the brain a bit more time to process, like, oh, something just happened. And it provides much weightier feedback. So this was kind of the first implementation of this, where we have kind of a nice little shake, a nice little flash effect on the enemy too. So it's a lot clearer to see that something's happening, some hit is happening immediately. Then I learned that visual effects are actually crucial in making those hits feel like they impact or made contact with the enemy, because without those, your brain has to do a lot more thinking to figure out what just happens, because when you hit something normally, there is a sound component, there is a hit component, and the flashier you make that visual effect, the more that hides that hit, and the better of a time the player has just seeing those nice little sparkles and hit effects when that happens as well. And using that in my game made it feel a lot more like you're actually making contact with these enemies and things are actually happening. Like, it's not just like they get pushed back, nothing else significance happens. And in Kingdom Hearts, they have those pretty prevalent anytime you make a hit, and it hides those hits so you can generalize the area. It gives you much better visual feedback that one of those hits connected. And in Hi-Fi Rush, these are super exaggerated. They're very quick, but they're super big and kind of obscures everything else that happens underneath the hit. So your brain can just feel like it made contact instead of focusing on where that hit happened on the enemy. One of the issues I ran into after releasing 2 was that my final combo did not feel like a finale. And this can happen in a few ways. In my case, I didn't really do any extra damage. There was no extra knockback. There wasn't a stun effect. And this hurt the design of the combat a lot. People didn't feel like what they were building up to really had any significance, which really hurt it. And on my next iteration, my next game is something I'm going to really start crucially looking at, because just like in Kingdom Hearts, once you get to that final combo, you have much better impact. And when you start to layer this on top of hitting of the enemies, the smaller enemies get knocked back further, like almost out of existence. And then the bigger enemies, while not being initially knocked back by your starting attacks, needs to have that finisher attack to actually stagger them. And even in boss forms, you can really tell just by the amount of damage that you're taking off, and the boss is physically being knocked back into the air, which is much different, or much more different than your just normal attacks, which will give them some sort of hit reaction. And that's where the weight of the attacks plays a significant role that my game is currently missing. That would really help bring the design into a much better spot as well. Whereas the weight of that end attack will either just completely annihilate the enemies around you if they are smaller, or they will significantly knock them back. So in the first few attacks, like they'll have a hit reaction for the smaller attacks, but the bigger attacks will really send them flying. Whereas the heavier units, actually your starting attacks do nothing. Nothing happens to them, nothing off places them, and your finisher is really what finally does the job to knock them off their feet and make them stagger. And that's would be really good to have in this situation where it would make that final piece of the attack feel like it has much more significance. And then Hi-Fi Rush, with their bigger units, they actually have a guard bar. So you don't really get any hit reaction from the bigger units until you have broken that guard bar. And even from that point, you'll start to get like a normal hit reaction until your final attack in the combo, which really sends them off kilter and flying. So the weight of attacks is really something crucial that would make the third-person combat just feel a bit better. Then my game, what I'm figuring out, a targeted attack system makes it feel much more like the inputs that you're having are really doing something. And with the Kingdom Hearts, when you have your lock on target, it will actually automatically turn your character to the enemy you're locked onto. So you have that immediate feedback, and then you start attacking and going towards that enemy that you're attacking, which is your targeted one, which will make it much more feeling like you're getting instant response from your attacks. When I first tried out these systems too, I knew there was some kind of pulling the player to the enemy, but I really didn't understand fully how that worked. My first iteration was just fanning out a bunch of rays, and if we hit an enemy, then we go to them. But because of not having a locked on target, if you are not instantly positioned to have your rotation towards the enemy, you won't get any kind of feedback because you're just fanning a ray cast out in a completely different direction than the enemy you would want to attack exists. And in Kingdom Hearts, you actually really need a good, clean animation to pull you to the enemy that you are targeting. Without it, it just kind of feels janky and feels like you are just being pulled and the controls don't make sense. So the animations themselves are really crucial to just closing the distance on those enemies, so you're not spending all your time chasing them down and figuring out what the best position is. So through this design, it was a super long process of just learning about third-person character combat, and there's still a lot I'm finding on the table to iterate on this next design, next game to go through. But it was super rewarding just getting to this point. And now that I got to this point, I can really start to understand those other games and the design decisions that went into them to make a much better third-person character combat system in my next iteration or next game. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Here's a way to get in touch if you'd like. The game's also live on itch.io. It's not indexed right now. Hopefully it will be soon, but it is playable if you want to give it a shot. There's a bunch of different contributors that worked on the game, all with varying contributions and kind of the logs as well, and the different resources I used and good resources I found to get to that point, and other ways to learn as well. All right. And looks like 6 minutes for questions if anyone has any. Yes.
How long did you work on this game?
It was 6 months. So it started in October and it released March 15th, so a little over a week ago. And again, this was just in my off time with some other contributors in their off time too. So it was a pretty tight development schedule to get it from the prototype where it was, where you just would hit a cylinder and it disappear, to actually getting it where all these different effects happened and the mechanics felt good to the player. All right.
No questions? Oh,
yes.
How do you break up repetition in the attack? You know, like in the Kingdom Hearts, the 1, 2 big swing. What are some ways to avoid that feeling?
Yeah, so what I found in Kingdom Hearts, they actually have a contextual awareness to their combat. So it understands how many enemies are in your vicinity and will switch it up so that you will have kind of an AoE based attack if you have more enemies around you. Whereas if you only have one immediately around you, it will tend to do more just single targeted attacks, which is a lot of the overhand ones. I found in mine that having the overhand as the finisher doesn't really help with the situation of having multiple mobs around you, because one, it's not as easy to make connect when it's an overhead straight down vertical slice, but an AoE makes it feel like you're hitting everything around you. It makes it much more grand.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.